Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. The sun is starting to shine in downtown Providence, and why? Jennifer Lawless from the University of Virginia is Skyping in from New York City. It can't get better than that. So far today, we've had Dr. Michael Fine on. The governor just concluded her press conference about 45 minutes ago. But let's go to the greatest show on earth, American politics. Jennifer, the Democrats, did they finally find a presidential candidate? They just can't do anything with him?
I think so. It seems that Andrew Cuomo has exceeded expectations, not only among New Yorkers, but nationwide. And he's basically the person that people are looking to for a sense of calm, cool, and collectedness when they don't get that from Donald Trump. The problem, of course, for Cuomo is that he opted not to run for president. We're very close to having a nominee, and it's not clear that there's any place for him to go.
So, here the Democrats, right, where, whatever it is, 70% the way through the Democratic primary structure. You've still got Senator Sanders from Vermont still in the race. Democrats have rallied around Joe Biden, but you don't get any sense of wild enthusiasm. And here is this breakout superstar. You could pick all the sports analogies in the world. Drew Bledsoe gets hurt, and here's Tom Brady. How can the Democrats have Mo Lewis hit former Vice President Biden and put him in the sidelines for a little while?
I think the only plausible scenario for a Cuomo presidency is if Sanders does not get out of the race, if he somehow winds up racking up a bunch of delegates so that it turns out to be a contested convention, and then no one gets the majority of delegates on the first round. I think it's a very, very unlikely scenario. It's unclear that Bernie Sanders would have an incentive to stay in simply to keep Joe Biden from becoming president. If there's no chance of him being the winner himself. So I think it's very, very unlikely, but I do think that Cuomo's performances highlight that Joe Biden really needs to figure out how to step it up a notch and provide sort of a shadow presidency at this time. And he's trying, he's starting. It's difficult because he's not actually in control of anything. He's not responsible for anything right now. So he doesn't have the authority that Andrew Cuomo has when he delivers these speeches. But I do think that people are looking for an alternative. And if Biden wants to shut this thing down and basically become the presumptive nominee, he's got to rise to the occasion.
Joe Biden tried it early, about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. He had sort of a alternative event one day after a presidential press conference on the coronavirus. It did not get well received. It did not perform particularly well, and it did not elevate him as the other leader of our country. How does Joe Biden, who has not shown it to date, elevate to that? What's the magic sauce?
Well, I think one thing that he can do is demonstrate that he has the ability to wheel and deal, like he's been saying he has, to get Congress to pass this stimulus package. If he has the connections that he has, start using them. And even if Donald Trump ultimately is the beneficiary of the package being passed, it's something that Biden could ultimately take credit for. That's really the only thing he can do, given that he's not currently an elected official.
So let's talk about the stimulus package, because I think a little bit of public opinion is that the Democrats are holding this up. Certainly curtailing long-term CEO salaries is an issue that many Americans have an affinity for. They'll have more an affinity of it. But the stock market yesterday lost $500 billion, which is 1/4 of the amount of what the value of this entire stimulus is it time that Chuck Schumer just votes for a bill? There just has to be a bill. And also understanding this isn't the last stimulus.
It's really tricky because it's, as far as the Democrats are concerned, a really bad bill. And it's a bad bill not only because of the people that are the biggest recipients of these bailouts. Donald Trump himself and his companies and his businesses also profit from this bill, or at least save from this bill. And so, the Republicans have basically given Chuck Schumer and the Democrats the worst possible scenario and then are engaged in a game of chicken. My sense is that Schumer can't hold out much longer. but something has to happen. But, I think that he's going to try a little bit longer. The other thing is the Democrats need to have better messaging at this point. Everybody is blaming them because they're not saying it's not their fault. I saw Nancy Pelosi just speaking, but at this point, Donald Trump, instead of holding rallies, is basically holding a daily press conference. And the Democrats have to figure out how to make their case to the American public, not only in terms of the presidency, but in terms of the stimulus package. And they've really been coming up short.
Tied to that is I haven't understood, how did Mitch McConnell outmaneuver everyone to make the initial stimulus package come out of the Senate and not usually money bills start in the House? How did that take place?
I mean, my understanding is that the first initial bill, which was very, very small, came out of the House, and the negotiation with Nancy Pelosi was that the big one would come from the Senate. I don't know that she expected it to look this way. It's also a little bit unheard of that the Republicans all got together, came up with a bill that they thought they could pass, and then brought the Democrats in. When you have something that's a national emergency like this, you would typically have a committee comprised of both Democrats and Republicans from the starting gate.
Listen, I've been around for a little while. Bob Byrd, Bob Dole, and Mitch McConnell were three experts at setting the agenda and hammering it home, whether it was sunny or rainy out. And Mitch McConnell, again, has proven to be very skilled at running the Senate.
There's no question. And, there's the famous saying, like, if I can vote on rules or substance, I'm going to vote on rules. I'll win every time. And that's basically what Mitch McConnell has done. The problem is that people are literally dying. And we've now created a situation, or he's created a situation, where either the Democrats or the Republicans, or at this rate, both, are going to be blamed for that, when ultimately they could actually be applauded for saving lives.
A number of members of Congress were flagged for making, quote, insider trade deals after they had received briefings about a month ago, maybe a little bit more. Three of them in the Senate side were Republicans, I believe one Democrat, and then some in the House as well. Does that maneuver set up that all of Congress is vulnerable come November?
I think so. I think this is one of these situations where when it's similar to the check bouncing scandal, or sort of other examples where you have a handful of members of Congress behaving badly and the entire institution takes the hit. Now, it's important to keep in mind that nobody approves of the job Congress is doing anyway, but a lot of them still like their own incumbent. This time around, even their own incumbents seem unable to deliver the package that the American people want. I will say that the best thing that ever could have happened to these insider traders is that this news is breaking during this pandemic, and it's not getting the kind of attention that would probably ordinarily have led to explicit calls for resignations and perhaps even follow through on those calls.
Well, I think that comes around in November. You're running a risk in Rhode Island. We have a workforce of 500,000. In the past 2 weeks alone, 56,000 people have filed for unemployment or temporary disability insurance. Our unemployment rate in all likelihood is going to hit 20%. That's never happened in my lifetime, and we really haven't seen those kind of numbers. Those folks aren't going to be all back to work by November. It seems like everybody's going to be on the hot seat come November.
That's exactly right. And a lot of the discussion about, well, Amazon's hiring 100,000 new people and Walgreens and CVS are hiring new people, that's terrific. And that's going to help a handful of people nationwide. But we're still talking about, and experts have said, we could be looking at a 20% unemployment rate, not only in Rhode Island, but nationwide. At that point, Congress and the president wind up being very, very vulnerable. And every single member should be worried about his or her seat.
Let's go to, and also they're not here. They're not vocal points. No one here has heard from any of the members of Congress in Rhode Island. And also they're, locked down, and now some of them are starting to contract coronavirus. So I'm sure the security and separation on them is going to get more and more fierce to be able to ensure their health. Obviously in the Senate, the average age has to be in the mid-70s.
The other thing to keep in mind there, too, is that's part of the problem with the stimulus package, in that the Senate rules require voting in person. And when you have a growing number of senators who are self-quarantining because of exposure, Mitt Romney, for example, is in self-quarantine, Mike Lee, because they had been in touch with or around Rand Paul, that makes it even more difficult to pass anything because you really need bipartisanship. You don't have enough numbers on either side when you've got a handful of Republicans who can't show up.
Well, do you remember in the olden days where members, when one was sick, another member who was going to vote the opposite way it was called pairing, would not vote in order not to affect the outcome of the vote?
So you might recall, this actually happened with Lisa Murkowski's vote on Brett Kavanaugh. She opted not to vote because a colleague had to go to a wedding or something, or there was an illness and he couldn't be there. We rarely see those examples of comedy anymore.
Only in the United States Senate.
Right.
Let's go to the Democratic presidential campaign. Here's Joe Biden, who functionally has a mathematical lead over Bernie Sanders in that Sanders cannot surpass him, but he also doesn't have enough delegates locked in to ensure himself the nomination, thus putting it in all of the unelected superdelegates' hands. Not the most democratic process. What is the danger points for the Democrats if Biden and Sanders stay in this to the convention?
Well, the obvious solution for the Democratic Party to remain cohesive and to not have a complete free-for-all at the convention is for Sanders to get out of the race. In that case, voters don't have to worry about whether their election days have been postponed or canceled leading up to the convention. Biden has the numbers, and there's basically a general election campaign starting right now. He could also potentially name a vice president, which would quell a lot of concerns about his age or his capacity, et cetera. If that's not going to happen, and it looks like right now Bernie Sanders is not planning on the next day or two dropping out of the race, it's a problem because in order for Sanders to be competitive, he has to win like 70% of the vote in almost all of the remaining states, which is a threshold he's never come close to achieving. But it does prevent Joe Biden from getting those 1991 delegates. And so as a result, you wind up having superdelegates choose the nominee. With the superdelegate numbers, he's likely to get over that threshold. But any concerns about the establishment or elitism or democratic politics with a capital D not really reflecting the people are exacerbated. And it then becomes imperative to encourage people who are really turned off by the process to turn out to vote, not necessarily for somebody that they don't like, because they like Joe Biden, but to participate in a process that they think is rigged.
The Democratic convention was supposed to be held in Milwaukee. Status, is there an update?
Unclear. It's unclear whether there will be a convention. It's unclear where it will be or how it will take place. Even if it does take place in July, I am virtually positive that it will not be the same kind of convention that we're accustomed to seeing, because even if we relax some of these social distancing measures, there's no question that gatherings of several thousand people in small spaces will still not be recommended, if even permitted, in a few months from now.
We could have Joe Biden Skyping in here, giving his Democratic nomination acceptance speech, the way things are going. How is this going to just transform politics? You know, politics are about gatherings and rallies and handshaking and baby kissing, and politics are going to be completely different. Most people will never go to that type of gathering again.
Right. I mean, now, a lot of people never went in the first place, but for that group of political junkies and people that are really politically active, this is going to be a fundamental shift. The upside, I think, is that there's a little bit more room for substance now. And if we just look at the last Democratic debate, I think that's a perfect example. When you don't have an audience, when you don't have people playing to their supporters explicitly, you can sometimes engage in more meaningful conversation. So I think it will fundamentally change the way that we talk about political issues and the mechanisms by which we transmit those conversations. But I'm not sure it's all for the bad. There's definitely, though, going to be, for the people that get excitement and energy out of the social component of politics, quite a bit of disappointment on the horizon.
Do we enter into an era of Lincoln-Douglas debates really becoming the structure?
I don't think we have candidates anymore who are capable of that kind of dialogue. So realistically, the format might be something we try, but I bet that the substance is going to fall pretty low on the impressive level.
You could literally see Donald Trump going over and somehow touching Joe Biden during a debate in order to say, you got it now, kind of tag, you've got the coronavirus.
Right, no question, no question.
Last question. You work at a university, you're involved in politics, you see how energy and information moves and connects people. What's your prediction on what UVA looks like in September?
It's tricky because, so all the students have gone home. They're cleaning out their stuff. We have been told that our buildings are basically locked down. If we have an emergency and we need to get materials, we can get them. But generally speaking, we're closed for further business and have moved entirely online. I had a department meeting today via Zoom. I taught my class yesterday via Zoom. And I think that given that universities are a lot like cruise ships, it's a ton of, it's a little space with tons of people who live there and eat there and breathe on each other all the time. It's possible that these are the kinds of venues that are going to be the last to reopen and that are going to be the hardest hit. And so when I think about the fall, it's not obvious to me that we're going to all be back in the classroom, that it's going to be business as usual.
Yeah, I spoke to a Division I basketball coach over the weekend who said, listen, who knows, right? Based on what the projections are from a public health standpoint, we're going to have this huge spike. Then hopefully, we don't know the behavior of this virus, but hopefully have a lull in the summer months, but then have an expectation, absent a vaccine, that this picks up again in the fall, traditionally the way viruses behave. So this is a complicated, long ride that's going to affect almost how everyone interacts with each other and how commerce is done.
I think that's right. And what I would add is that even if we are able to buy some time because there might be a lull over the summer and we're better equipped to handle phase 2 of this in the fall, that doesn't mean that every venue and every setting and every business are going to be equally well equipped to handle the second wave. And it's college campuses, it's casinos, it's hotels, it's cruise ships, it's these large group gatherings that I think are still going to be the most vulnerable and thus probably the least able to get back to business as usual, even if a lot of other businesses are able to start picking things up and weather the second wave of the storm.
From a UVA standpoint, it might be the end of the Cameron crazies, though. There is always an upside to any type of situation.
We also are still defending our NCAA championship from last year. So if you have to put a silver lining around things, I'll take it.
And lacrosse, I believe you're the defending lacrosse champion.
Although Brown beat UVA a couple of weeks ago.
I know. Last word. What's your last word today?
I mean, I would say that the big thing that I'm watching for this week is what happens to Anthony Fauci. And the American people have really begun to depend on him and trust him, and Donald Trump has become increasingly disgusted with him. And so is this going to be a situation where putting the importance of what the American people want to hear ahead of his own views is something that Trump is able to do? And we'll see that over the course of the next few days and the next few press conferences.
Professor Lawless has the last word. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We have an absolutely jam-packed day tomorrow. Stay tuned. Also, stay tuned. Almost every hour, a major story is breaking related to this in Rhode Island and nationally. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Professor Lawless, thank you so much for Skyping in today. And we'll be back either later today or tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.